Silas Thorne's hand slammed onto the launch lever. Metal screamed against metal as the rusted cargo pod lurched. Behind us, the Archon blade ships rained sapphire plasma, liquefying the magnetic rail into molten slag just inches from our heels. The catapult groaned, a dying giant gasping for one last breath. Everything hung on a single, sparking circuit. Is the price of freedom always measured in the seconds before an explosion? Subscribe and tell us if you'd pull the lever or stay to fight the inevitable. 6 solar cycles earlier, the only thing screaming was the wind across the rust plains. Vesper knelt in the iron dust, prying a stubborn copper grounding bolt from a skeletal harvester. The sky over Dust Rain 4 was a bruised orange, thick with the grit of 1,000 failed excavations. Vesper didn't mind the silence. Silence didn't judge you for failing a strategic simulation. It didn't strip your family name or dump you on a graveyard world because you prioritized 300 civilian lives over a logistical win. Beneath the shadow of a tilting pylon, a sudden roar tore the air. Vesper froze. Ships didn't come here unless they were looking for a place to die. This one was doing it with spectacular violence. The vessel was a jagged splinter of white alloy, trailing a tail of black smoke that tasted like ozone and burnt electronics. It skipped off a salt crag, somersaulted through a cloud of red dust, and buried its nose in the side of a silicate ridge. When the dust settled, Vesper found herself running. Curiosity was a dangerous trait for an exile, but her feet moved before her mind could protest. The ship was compact and efficient, marked with the blocky script of the Terran Union. Humans. She'd heard they were a species of high-functioning accidents. Inside the cockpit, a man was coughing. He was struggling with a snagged zipper on his flight suit, his face streaked with soot and blood. He looked up and saw her. Well, the human wheezed, reaching for a dented thermos on the floor. He took a slow, measured sip of a dark, bitter-smelling liquid. That definitely wasn't on the flight plan. Silas took another sip of the chicory, the steam curling around his bruised nose. He offered the flask to Vesper. She stared at the scratched metal, her internal sensors registering the heat radiating from his hands. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was offering a drink. If the hegemony finds out I'm using the old protocols to assess this wreckage, they'll, no, focus on the power relay. Vesper helped him out of the seat. A small, spherical drone drifted out behind him, its single blue eye rotating with a clicking sound. This was Unit 7V. It began calculating the structural integrity of the mountain, ignoring the fact that its master was currently bleeding. Silas Thorne didn't look like a legendary pilot. He looked like a man who had lost a fight with gravity and won by a narrow margin. He began talking immediately, a stream of consciousness that Vesper's translation implants struggled to categorize. Humans used a lot of words to say very little. I have a pulse warning, Silas said, his voice dropping as he leaned against the hull. The obsidian swarm is moving. They aren't hitting the frontier. They're jumping the dead zones. Vesper's breath hitched. She knew those zones. She'd mapped them in the Archon Academy. They were unstable and chaotic, the perfect cover for a genocide. I can fix your relay, she whispered, her hands already reaching for her toolkit. Wait, Silas grunted, his fingers fumbling with the heavy seal of his neck ring. The zipper was jammed with red grit. Vesper reached out, her spindly fingers steady as she cleared the dust and eased the metal slider upward. The click of the seal locking into place sounded louder than the distant, rhythmic thunder of the Archon engines. The Archon blade ships descended like shards of polished silver, their scanning beams slicing through the red dust of the valley with a predatory hunger that Vesper recognized from the tactical manuals she had once memorized before her exile stripped her of everything but her memory. The ship is holding together, but the port side thruster is, well, we'll cross that bridge when we're burning, Silas muttered, checking the glowing data pulse on his wrist. Vesper watched him rewire the navigation core to the external transmitter array. It was a crude, brilliant improvisation. By overloading the reactor, Silas wasn't just destroying the evidence. He was turning the wreckage into a massive acoustic decoy. The Archon sensors would see a dozen phantom ships jumping into the system, forcing them to peel away from the gorge to intercept a ghost fleet. This is not a strategic deployment, Vesper observed, her eyes tracking the lead blade ship. It is a cull. They're not here for you, Silas. They are here to erase the witness who knows their secret. Then let's give them something else to look at, Silas said. We ran. The sand turned to glass beneath the heat of the descending ships. We reached the magnetic catapult just as the first plasma strike evaporated the salvage camp behind us. And now, in the shadow of the canyon walls, the moment of logic finally arrived. The air smelled of ozone and desperation as we scrambled into the pressurized cargo sled. Silas gripped the rusted launch handle, his knuckles white against the scarred iron. The Archon fired. The magnetic rail beneath us began to glow, turning into a river of molten slag that hissed against the sled's runners. Silas didn't wait for the computer to greenlight the trajectory. He simply pulled. Fire bloomed. The sled tore away from the explosion with a force that crushed the breath from Vesper's lungs. Gravity fought to keep us on the dust-choked surface, but the catapult was stronger. We pierced the orange clouds, the friction screaming against the canopy until the noise suddenly vanished. The vibration stopped. Silence replaced the roar of the atmospheric friction. Vesper reached into the pocket of her cloak and pulled out the dented copper grounding bolt, the metal still holding the faint, lingering heat of the rust plains. Outside the canopy, the stars were no longer distant points of light to be calculated, but a map of a future she had finally chosen to claim. The galaxy is full of things that shouldn't work, yet somehow they do. If you enjoyed this journey through the dust, tell us which star we should visit tomorrow.